The map was wrong. Nora Carter knew it the moment Marshal Harvey Ramsey unfolded it across the weathered oak table of the Dusty Creek trading post, spreading it flat with his big, calloused hands like it was gospel truth handed down from heaven itself. She said nothing at first. She let him study it, let him trace the dotted line eastward with his fingertip, let him believe for another 30 seconds that he had any idea what lay between them and the Missouri border. Then she reached across, placed 2 fingers on the river marking near the center of the map, and said, "That river does not exist." Harvey Ramsey pulled his hand back slowly. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders in the way that comes from real work rather than posture, with a jaw sharpened by years of hard weather and harder decisions. The silver star on his chest caught the dim light of the oil lamp. His gray eyes, the color of storm clouds building over open plains, moved from the map to her face. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was quiet, which somehow made it more dangerous. "That river," Nora said, keeping her voice steady and her eyes level. "The one your map shows running north to south between the Ozark foothills and the Kansas line. It has not run water since 1869. Flash flooding rerouted the channel. What is there now is a dried gully filled with loose shale and sandstone, and in wet season, which this is, those walls collapse. You ride into that canyon following this map, and you will lose your horses, your prisoner, and possibly your life." The trading post was quiet. Old Hector, who ran the place and had seen enough frontier arguments to write a book, pretended to be very interested in the tobacco he was sorting behind the counter. The other man in the room, Deputy Clarence Webb, a young fellow with a sunburned nose and nervous hands, looked between his marshal and this lean, sun-browned woman in buckskin trousers and a canvas jacket, not quite sure which direction danger was coming from. Harvey did not take his eyes off Nora. "And you know this," he said, because I have walked that ground," Nora said simply. 3 times in the last 2 years, most recently 6 weeks ago." He studied her for a long moment. She had learned over the years to hold that kind of gaze without flinching, without smiling apologetically, without softening herself to make a man feel better about what her words were doing to his confidence. She was 28 years old and she had earned every mile of frontier in her bones. "Who are you?" Harvey asked. "Nora Carter. I scout trail routes for wagon companies and survey parties. I have mapped 260 miles of territory between the Arkansas River and the Missouri border, and I have done it accurate enough that the Army pays good money for my surveys." She paused. "Your map was printed in St. Louis in 1871 by a man who, as far as I can tell, never left St. Louis." Something shifted behind his eyes, not surrender, something more interesting than that. She watched him recalibrate, watched him file away the old assumption and reach for a new framework, and she respected him for how quickly and without theatrics he did it. "The Calder brothers," he said, and his voice dropped to something harder, colder. "I have a prisoner who witnessed a federal murder. I have to get him to Jefferson City alive by the end of the month, or the case dies with the statute window. The Calder outfit has people between here and there, people who know every road, every cutoff, every relay station." Nora looked at him for a moment. Then she pulled out the chair across from him and sat down. "Tell me the route you planned," she said. He told her. She listened without interrupting, which she knew surprised him. She let him finish completely before she spoke. "The Calder people will expect you on the main trace," she said. "Every other lawman who has tried to move a witness east has taken the main trace because it is the only route on a printed map. Here is what you do not know." She reached into the leather satchel at her feet and produced her own map. It was hand-drawn, in pencil and ink on oilskin so it would survive weather. The detail was extraordinary. Harvey leaned forward without thinking about it, drawn toward the precision of the lines, the way a man is drawn toward a fire in cold darkness. "There is a secondary route. It runs through the Morrow Breaks, which everyone assumes is impassable because the terrain looks brutal from a distance. I have surveyed it. It is passable if you know the switchbacks, if you know where the creek crossings are solid, and if you know to avoid the north slope between mile markers 30 and 44 because the soil is undermined with old mine shafts. You have this memorized, Harvey said. It was not entirely a question. I have walked it, Nora said. I know it better than I know most people. He sat back and looked at her with an expression she had not quite seen on a man before. It was somewhere between professional assessment and something warmer, something he seemed to be working to keep professional. Miss Carter, he said, I need a guide. I know, she said. I have been thinking about that since you walked in here and unfolded that map. It will be dangerous. The Calder brothers do not play fair. Marshal, Nora said, and she let a small, dry smile touch the corner of her mouth. I have scouted through Apache territory in the dead of winter and navigated a flooded river crossing with a mule team and 3 oxen. I do not particularly scare easy. He held her gaze for another beat. Then he leaned forward and extended his hand across the table. Harvey Ramsey, he said. She shook it firmly. His grip was solid, not testing, just honest. I know who you are, Nora said. You have a reputation for being the most stubborn man in 4 territories. The corner of his mouth moved. That is generally considered a professional asset in my line of work. It generally is, she agreed. As long as you can tell the difference between stubbornness and wrongness. Can you? Yes, Nora said. That is why I am the one telling you your map is wrong. They left before dawn, which was Nora's requirement. She had laid out the terms quietly but without compromise the night before. They moved on her schedule, took the trail she designated, made camp where she determined it was safe, and in all matters of route and terrain, her word was final. Harvey had listened to all of this with his arms folded, and when she finished he had said, agreed, and that had been that. It was, she reflected now, riding slightly ahead as the first gray light crept over the eastern hills, the cleanest negotiation she had ever had with a man. The prisoner was a slight, frightened-looking man named Amos Pickett, 41 years old, with a permanent look about him of someone bracing for the next blow. He had witnessed, from the window of a supply warehouse, the murder of a federal revenue agent by 2 of the Calder brothers, and it had taken the federal court 18 months to find him and another 3 to convince him that testifying was safer than silence. Nora felt a pragmatic sort of sympathy for him. The Calders were real danger, not frontier legend. 3 brothers who had built a criminal enterprise across 4 states by being willing to do what most men would not. Deputy Clarence Webb rode behind Pickett, looking earnest and slightly lost. He was 22, Nora had determined, and had been a deputy for about 8 months, and this was the first serious assignment he had drawn. She had decided she liked him, in the way you like an eager but untrained dog. He meant well and would probably be fine as long as no one expected too much too soon. Harvey rode to her left, half a length back, which was correct positioning for the situation. She had expected him to push forward, to insist on riding point. He had not. He had assessed the situation, accepted that she knew the terrain and he did not, and adjusted accordingly. She found this more interesting than she had anticipated. The morning was cool and smelled of sage and damp earth. The sky went from gray to pale gold as they climbed the first ridge of the Morro Breaks, the horses picking their way carefully over limestone outcroppings. Nora read the ground the way most people read text, constantly, automatically, cataloging information. A fresh track here, deer crossing last night. A broken branch there, recent but not today. The creek 20 yards below running clear and brisk, which meant no significant rainfall upstream in the last several days, which meant the crossings would be manageable. You are quiet, Harvey said, riding up alongside her on a flat stretch. I am reading the ground, Nora said. He glanced downward, then back at her. What does it say? No one has been through here since the last heavy rain. That was 9 days ago, which puts us ahead of anyone who might be tracking us. For now, he said. For now, she agreed. A silence settled between them that was not uncomfortable. She had noticed, somewhat against her will, that Harvey Ramsey occupied space differently than most men. He did not fill it with noise or assertion. He was simply present, solid, and quiet in a way that she found herself oddly aware of. "How long have you been scouting?" he asked. "Professionally, since I was 22. My father was a surveyor. He took me into the field with him from the time I was old enough to walk without slowing him down, which was roughly age 7 by his assessment." "That is young." "He was not a sentimental man," Nora said. "He was a thorough one. He taught me to read terrain, to map accurately, to navigate by stars and sun and landmark. When he died, I had the skills and the tools and not much else, so I used them." "Where is your family now?" "My mother died when I was 4. I have no siblings. I have a cabin on the White River that I share with a very opinionated mule named Clementine." She glanced at him sideways. "You, parents in Ohio, a sister married to a farmer outside Columbus." He paused. "I have been a lawman for 11 years. Started as a deputy in Wichita, made marshal 6 years ago. No family of my own. No wife." It was a direct question. She was not a circuitous person. "No wife," he said, equally direct. "There was a woman in Abilene 7 years back. She decided the work was too dangerous and the pay too uncertain, which were both accurate assessments. She married a banker." "That seems wise on her part." "It was entirely wise on her part," he said. "We both knew it." There was something in the way he said it, a clean, honest acceptance with no bitterness underneath it, that she filed away without quite meaning to. They made camp that first night in a sheltered hollow that Nora had identified on her oilskin map with a small notation. "Good water, hidden from high ground, wood available." She had marked it 6 weeks ago, in precisely the same mental frame she was in now, choosing a campsite not for comfort but for defensibility and concealment. Harvey watched her set up the camp with a focused efficiency that he clearly found somewhat startling. She knew the look. She had seen it before on men who arrived expecting to have to explain things to her and found instead that she had already completed them. "You have a system," he said. "I have several systems," Nora said. "Would you like me to explain them, or would you prefer to help with the fire?" He built the fire while she checked the horses, strung a line of small brass bells she carried for the purpose at the perimeter of the camp, and walked the hollow's rim in the fading light, reading it one more time in her mind. By the time she came back to the fire, Clarence had set out the food supplies, and Harvey had coffee going in the camp pot. The smell of it in the cooling night air was unexpectedly comforting. They ate hardtack and salt pork and tinned beans, and Amos Pickett, who had been almost entirely silent all day, said quietly, "How long until we get there?" 8 days if conditions hold," Nora said. "Maybe 6 if the lower crossing is as good as I believe it is. We will know more tomorrow afternoon." He nodded, looking both relieved and terrified, which seemed to be his default state. After Clarence and Pickett had turned in, Nora and Harvey sat on opposite sides of the fire. The night sounds of the breaks surrounded them, an owl far off, the creek talking over stones, the particular quality of silence that belongs only to deep wilderness. She was comfortable in it. She watched him to see if he was. He sat with his coffee cup between his hands and his eyes moving over the middle distance in the easy, alert way of a man accustomed to keeping watch, and he was not filling the silence with unnecessary words. She approved of this. "Tell me about the Calder brothers," she said. "Everything, not what is in a report." He looked at her steadily. "You want to know who we are actually dealing with?" "I have scouted the trail," she said. "I need to know the human terrain," he told her. 3 brothers. Eli, the oldest at 44, who was the mind of the operation, cold and meticulous and never acted without knowing all angles. Deke, 38, who was the violence, quick and unpredictable and ferociously loyal to Eli. And Thomas, 32, the youngest, who handled money and bribery and had people at relay stations, towns, and in several county sheriff offices across 3 states. The federal revenue agent they had killed had been getting too close to their smuggling network, a web of stolen army supplies, whiskey, and land fraud that stretched from Texas to Missouri. "They will know I left Dusty Creek with a prisoner," Harvey said. "Thomas has informants everywhere, that is not a question." "They will not know which route," Nora said. "They will assume the main trace." "Yes," Nora said, and they will have people on the main trace and we will not be on it. He looked at her across the fire and she saw that he was working through something. There is another problem, he said. She waited. Deke Calder knows these territories, not from surveys, from living in them. He was a mountain man before he fell in with his brothers. He can track. Nora absorbed this. It was a genuine complication. How good is he? She asked. Good enough that 2 men I sent before you, professionals, could not shake him. What happened to them? Harvey's jaw tightened. They did not make it to Jefferson City. The fire crackled. Nora looked into it for a moment, not afraid, simply cataloging. Then we will need to use the terrain against him, she said. A good tracker can follow you wherever you go, but a good scout can find ground where following is either impossible or inadvisable and push the choice back onto the tracker. Make him choose between losing the trail or taking on ground he cannot control. Harvey was quiet for a moment. You have done this before. Twice, Nora said. Once with a Comanche war party that was tracking a survey group I was guiding. Once with a gang of horse thieves who had very personal reasons for wanting to find me. And you lost them both times. Both times, she said, alive and intact. He looked at her for a long moment and she saw something in his face that was not quite what she had been seeing before, something more wondering. Miss Carter, he said. Nora, she said. 8 days on a trail together, you might as well. Nora, he said, and she noticed that her name in his voice was different from how it sounded anywhere else, waited slightly, careful. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, even if the honest answer is uncomfortable. That is generally the only kind of answer I give, she said. Why did you agree to this? He asked. The money I offered is fair, but it is not exceptional. This is dangerous work. You could pick any survey job, any wagon company, anything safer. Why take on the Calder brothers? She considered the question seriously, the way she considered all serious questions. Amos Pickett saw something true, and he is willing to say so at great personal cost, she said. People who do the difficult and honest thing deserve to be protected when they do it. That is one reason. She paused. The other reason is that it is the most technically challenging scout I have been offered in 2 years, and I found the route before anyone asked me to. I scouted that corridor 6 weeks ago because I thought it had potential, because that is what I do. I look for paths where others see obstacles. And then you walked into Hector's trading post with your wrong map, and the 2 things lined up. She shrugged. It seemed like the territory telling me something. Harvey Ramsey looked at her for a long, quiet moment. I am very glad, he said carefully, that you were in that trading post. So am I, Nora said, and meant it in more ways than she was entirely prepared to examine right then. The second day took them deeper into the breaks, and Nora earned her fee before noon. The trail she had charted angled north and then sharply east at a place where the rock formations created what looked, from any approach angle, like an impassable wall. She had found, 6 weeks ago, the narrow lateral cut through the base of the formation, 15 feet wide at most, with 12-foot rock walls on either side and loose gravel underfoot. A person who did not know it existed would ride another 6 miles around, adding time and leaving tracks on open ground. She led them through it single file, Harvey directly behind her, the horses nervous about the tight space and close walls but manageable. The cut took 10 minutes to traverse. When they came out the other side, Harvey pulled up alongside her and looked back at what they had come through. No one finds that without being shown, he said. That is correct, Nora said. How did you find it? I follow water, she said. That cut exists because a seasonal stream runs through it in spring. If you know to look for where water has carved into rock over time, you find passages no one thought to put on a map. She looked at him. Your map had nothing in this region but blank space labeled broken country. From now on, Harvey said, I am burning any map made in St. Louis. This surprised a genuine laugh out of her, quick and real, and she watched him notice it the way you notice something rare. They camped the second night on high ground with a sightline back along their trail for 2 miles. Nora set the brass bells again, checked the horses, And this time Clarence asked if she could teach him what she was doing with the perimeter line. She liked him for asking rather than assuming, so she showed him, explained the spacing, the height, the knot that would hold against wind but release if something brushed the line. He took it seriously and learned quickly. Harvey watched this from where he was tending to the horses, and when she came back past him he said, "You are patient with him." "He is trying to learn," Nora said. "That is the only thing that makes patience worthwhile." The third day brought the first real test. They were picking their way down a long, rocky descent when Nora stopped her horse and held up one hand. Harvey stopped immediately, no questions, and she heard him pass the silent signal back to Clarence. She sat completely still and looked at the hillside 200 yards ahead and to the left. There, movement that was not wind in the scrub oak, two shapes, maybe three. She turned her horse sideways to the trail and spoke quietly, not whispering because whispering carries strangely. "Riders on the left slope, not visible from below, but I can see disturbed brush. 3, possibly 4. They are not moving, which means they are watching." Harvey came forward quietly to her level. He looked where she indicated and she watched him work it out. "Could be unconnected," he said. "Could be," she said. "But the position is wrong for innocent travelers. They are above the trail with a sightline to the pass below. That is an observation point, not a camping spot." He was quiet for a moment. "Can we avoid them?" "Yes," she said. "But we have to go back 40 yards and take the east drainage. It will cost us 3 hours and it will be rough going for the horses. Or we push through. And we cannot know until we are in range whether they are hostile or not. If they are Calder people and they make us, we lose our primary advantage, which is them not knowing our route." She paused. 3 hours of rough country seems preferable to losing the element of surprise. He thought for exactly 5 seconds. "We go back," he said. They went back, took the east drainage, and it was indeed rough going. But the horses managed, and Nora picked the line with such care that not one animal stumbled. When they came out of the drainage 2 hours and 40 minutes later on a ridge that gave them a sightline to where the watchers had been, the position was empty. "They moved on," Clarence said, sounding relieved. "Or they are further ahead," Harvey said, which was the right reading. "Further ahead on the main trace," Nora said. "Not this route. There is nowhere on this trail that creates a good ambush position for the next 12 miles. I have checked." Harvey looked at her. "You checked for ambush positions when you scouted this?" "I check everything," Nora said simply. That evening, setting camp in a cedar grove near a spring she had noted with the notation, "Sweet water, good concealment." Nora found Harvey had managed the horses without being asked, had laid out her bedroll near the fire on the sheltered side, and had left a cup of coffee sitting on a flat stone where she would naturally return to sit. She picked up the cup and looked at him. "Thank you," she said. "You have been on your feet since before dawn," he said, not looking at her, fussing with something in his saddlebag. "You found that drainage under pressure without consulting your map. That deserves a cup of coffee at minimum." She sat down with the cup and the warmth of it in her hands was very good. After a moment she said, "You are not what I expected." He came and sat across the fire from her. "What did you expect?" "A man who would need to be right," she said. "About the map, about the route, about everything. A man who would struggle with the idea that he needed a guide who happened not to be a man." He considered this honestly. "I will tell you the truth. When I unfolded that map and you told me it was wrong, my first instinct was to argue." "I know," she said. "I could see it. And then I looked at your face," he said, "and I saw that you were telling me a factual thing without any agenda behind it. No need to prove anything, no desire to make me feel small, just information." He shook his head slowly. "It is somewhat rarer than it should be. Among men or among people?" "Both," he said fairly. "Though I find it particular in people who are right. Most people who are right about something need you to know how right they are." "Being right is not interesting," Nora said. "The information is interesting. What you do with it is interesting. Whether you were wrong before is just history." He looked at her steadily in the firelight. "That is a very practical philosophy." "The frontier teaches it," she said. Be wrong about the trail, acknowledge it, correct course. The other approach is fatal. In my work, Harvey said, being wrong costs other people their lives. There was a weight in this that she could hear clearly, and she did not try to argue it away. Tell me about the men who did not make it to Jefferson City, she said quietly. He was quiet for a moment. Jim Haskell, he said, my best deputy, 8 years with me. He volunteered, said he could get the previous witness through. He stopped. And Sam Boone, a freelance agent the court hired, both good men. Both experienced. Deke Calder found them, 3 days out from Dusty Creek on the main trace. Nora absorbed this. The weight of it was real. Harvey, she said, and his name felt right and deliberate in her mouth. They were on a known route, we are not, that is the whole difference. I know, he said, I know that up here. He touched his temple. The other part of me is aware of what it will mean if I am wrong about you. She held his gaze steadily. Then do not be wrong about me. I am not, he said. I am not wrong about you. The 4th day passed without incident, and they made good time, Nora pushing them hard through a long, beautiful valley of winter grass and scattered juniper. That was one of the portions of the route she liked best. She had ridden it before in early morning light that turned the grass gold, but she had been alone, and she found herself noticing, quietly and without making anything of it, that the valley was better with company. Not the abstract company of Clarence and Amos Pickett, who were a length behind arguing quietly about card games. Harvey rode level with her, and she was simply aware of him, the way you are aware of a landmark that you have come to rely on for orientation. On the 4th night, she spread her oilskin map on the flat rock she was using as a table and went over the remaining terrain with him properly, explaining each decision point, each feature, each contingency. He listened with complete attention and asked precise, relevant questions, and she thought that he was the best listener she had encountered, which was in her experience rarer than most people supposed. The lower crossing, he said, pointing to her notation on the map. You said we would know by tomorrow afternoon how it is. The creek will tell us, she said. The water level and speed will tell me how the rock shelf beneath is holding. If it has shifted since I was here, we may need to go north to the ford instead, which adds a day. And if we add a day, we are still within the window. Yes, she said. We have time. I built the margin in. He looked at her. You built the margin in. Any route plan that does not account for variance is not a route plan, Nora said. It is optimism written on paper. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. I have met many optimists with maps. They have a hard time in the field, Nora said. She was rolling the map back up when he put his hand briefly over hers. She went still. It was not a presumptuous gesture. It was careful, deliberate, just a moment of contact, and he took his hand away as soon as she stopped moving. I want to say something, he said. She waited. I have been thinking, Harvey said, about the fact that you scouted this route 6 weeks ago, before I came to Dusty Creek, before you knew I existed. He paused. You had already found the path through. You had already done the work. And then I walked in with my wrong map and my problem, and you had already solved it. The territory does not know your schedule, Nora said. I scout because I scout. I do not wait for problems to arrive before looking for solutions. I know that, he said. What I am trying to say, and I am finding it difficult to say clearly, is that it mattered. The fact that you had already been there. The fact that you knew. It matters to me in a way I am not entirely sure how to articulate. Nora looked at him in the firelight. He was not a man who spoke this way easily. She could hear the effort of it. I think, she said carefully, that you are saying you feel like you can trust me. Yes, he said, and more than that, I respect you, genuinely, not as a concession or an accommodation, as the plainest fact I have encountered out here. She was quiet for a moment. Harvey, she said, I do not need to be told I am capable. I know you do not, he said. That is not what I am telling you. She looked at him. I am telling you, he said, meeting her eyes with a steadiness that she felt in her chest, that I am glad you exist, specifically, in the world, on this trail, at this fire. She held very still. She was a woman who had spent 10 years making herself invulnerable to the kind of sentiment that usually preceded someone needing something from her. She had built the competence and the distance in equal measure, and she had not been unhappy with the arrangement. But Harvey Ramsey was looking at her as though she were something he had not expected to find and was enormously grateful for, and he was doing it without asking her for anything. "Thank you," she said at last. "That is." She paused. "That is a good thing to say." He nodded once quietly and went back to his coffee, and she sat for a long moment listening to the night and feeling something in her chest that she had not felt in quite some time, warm and somewhat alarming, like finding a fire in a room you thought was cold. The fifth day brought the lower crossing, and the creek was exactly as she had hoped, running brisk but shallow over a rock shelf that had not shifted, solid and reliable under the horses' hooves, and they crossed in 4 minutes without incident. When they came up the far bank, Clarence whooped, and even Amos Pickett managed a thin, grateful smile. Harvey rode up beside Nora as she sat her horse on the far bank, checking the crossing behind them. "As good as you said," he told her. "Better," she said, and she was smiling, which she noticed he noticed. "You love this," he said. "It was not a judgment, it was a recognition." "The terrain never lies," she said. "It tells you exactly what it is. If you are wrong, it is because you did not listen, not because the ground deceived you. There is a kind of comfort in that." She looked out over the hills ahead, the way east opening before them. "It is very different from people." "People lie," Harvey said. "People have hidden motives," Nora said. "People tell you what they want you to know and withhold the rest. The terrain cannot do that. What it shows you is what it is. I find that restful." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the horizon with her. "I do not have hidden motives," he said. "I know," she said. "I worked that out on the first day." He looked at her sideways. "You tested me." "I observe," she said. "I do not test. Testing implies an outcome you are trying to achieve. Observing just means paying attention." "And what did paying attention tell you about me?" She considered this honestly. "That you are a man who knows what his responsibilities are and meets them without drama. That you are capable of changing your position when the facts require it, which is rarer than it should be. That you are thoughtful in a way that your profession does not specifically reward. That you are," she paused, choosing the word carefully, "trustworthy, the actual thing, not the performance of it." He held her gaze for a long moment, and she saw something in his face that was not entirely composed. "Nora," he said. "We should keep moving," she said, because the warmth in her chest was getting difficult to remain neutral about, and she had 8 people depending on her navigation, and feelings were best examined when no one's safety depended on her attention. "We can make the ridge camp before dark if we push." They pushed. They made it. And that night, sitting across the fire from him in the cedar-smelling dark, she was quietly, thoroughly aware that she was happy in a way that surprised her. It was the 6th day that the Calder people found them. Not Deke, not yet. 2 riders who came out of the trees to the south while Nora and Harvey were scouting a quarter-mile ahead of the others, having left Clarence with Amos Pickett at a rest stop by the creek. The riders came fast, and then pulled up when they saw it was only 2 people, and not the group they expected. Nora read the hesitation in the horse's body language before she registered the riders' faces, and she already had her hand moving toward the Winchester repeater across her saddle when Harvey said, quietly and entirely calm, "I see them." "2," she said. "Armed. They did not expect us here." "No," he said. "They are looking for the main trace party. We are in the wrong place from their perspective. They are going to decide in the next 15 seconds whether to run or ride toward us." They rode toward them, and Harvey's hand went to his Colt, and Nora levered the Winchester with a smooth, practiced motion that she saw stopped both riders in their tracks. "United States Marshal," Harvey called, clear and carrying. "Hands where I can see them." One of the riders complied. The other made a very poor decision and went for his gun, and Harvey drew and fired in a motion so swift and precise that Nora's mind registered it as a single event rather than 2. The gun went spinning from the rider's hand. The man screamed and clutched his hand to his chest. "Not killed," Harvey said to Nora, without looking away from the riders. I was raised not to kill if I do not have to. I noticed, she said. She kept the Winchester on the riders as Harvey dismounted and secured them, working with the economical efficiency of a man who had done this many times. The riders, it turned out, had a letter in one of their saddlebags addressed to Eli Calder. The letter said that the marshal had not appeared on the main trace as expected and that someone needed to check whether he had gone north or stayed in Dusty Creek. Thomas's informant at Dusty Creek lost us, Harvey said, looking at the letter. They do not know where we are. They will know now that we are in the breaks, Nora said. Yes, he looked at her. How long before they can get Deke onto us? If Deke is at the Calder Ranch in Cass County, which is where I would guess he is, 12 hours at hard riding to reach this area. She looked around the terrain, reading it with fresh urgency. We need to put distance between us and this position before then, and I need to change the last segment of the route. He looked at her. Change it? Why? Because these two will eventually get loose or get found and they know we are in the breaks. Even if they do not know our exact line, Deke will narrow it. He will look for where 2 riders plus 2 came through, and he will find the lower crossing. She was already unfolding her map in her head, running the alternative lines. There is another way into the final approach. It adds 8 miles and it is harder going, but it is ground that even an experienced tracker will not read easily because the substrate is limestone karst. It does not hold prints. Harvey looked at her with an expression of pure, open respect that she thought he might not be entirely aware of. Lead the way, he said. She led the way. They rode hard that afternoon, covering miles of terrain that Nora navigated by memory and by reading every feature of the landscape with the focused intensity of someone for whom the information was not academic but immediate. The karst ground was exactly as she remembered it, pale and pitted and stubbornly print-resistant, and she felt the particular satisfaction of the right tool for the right problem. Amos Pickett, to his considerable credit, kept up without complaint. Clarence watched Nora navigate with an expression of open admiration. Harvey rode with his eyes on the terrain around them, covering angles she was not watching, understanding without being told that she was managing the route and he was managing the perimeter, and together they were covering all the ground that mattered. Late in the afternoon, she found the limestone bluff she had noted 6 weeks ago as a possible campsite. Excellent defensive position, her notation read. Fresh spring at base, no approach from west, full sightline east and south. She brought them to it and said they would stop here for the night. We push through, Harvey said, not argumentatively. If Deke is riding. We cannot ride through the karst in darkness without injuring the horses, Nora said. And tired people make mistakes. 8 miles of hard riding in the morning on rested animals is faster and safer than 12 miles of night riding on spent ones. She held his gaze. Trust the math. He looked at her for a long moment. Then, all right. That night Nora could not quite sleep. She lay on her bedroll with her eyes open and her mind mapping the next day's route, turning the terrain in her mental hands like a 3-dimensional object, checking for anything she had missed. It was a habitual and usually successful process. Tonight it kept getting interrupted by the awareness of Harvey Ramsey sitting up against the limestone wall 6 feet away, having taken the first watch. She could hear his breathing, steady and slow. She could see in the faint moonlight the silhouette of him, broad-shouldered and still. She got up quietly. I will take the watch, she said. I am not tired, he said. Neither am I, she said, and sat down beside him, not quite where she had been before, closer. So we will both keep it. He looked at her in the moonlight. She looked back. Nora, he said after a moment, in the careful voice that he used when he was about to say something that cost him something. Harvey, she said. I have been thinking, he said. About the trail, she asked, though she knew it was not about the trail. About after the trail, he said. About Jefferson City, about when this is finished. She was quiet. I have been thinking, he said, about the fact that I do not want to stop knowing you after this. He paused. That is an unusual thing for me to think. Is it? She said. I am not a man who says this kind of thing, he said. I want you to know that this is not. He stopped, started again. You are the most remarkable person I have met in 11 years of meeting people professionally. And I meet a great many people. And that is not about the scouting, though the scouting is extraordinary. It is about you, how you are. She sat with this for a moment. I have spent 10 years, she said, making myself sufficient, making myself the person who does not need anyone else to solve the problem, and I am good at that. I am genuinely good at that. She paused. But I have been sitting at this fire every night and thinking that sufficiency is not the same thing as satisfaction. He turned to look at her. I am not easy to be around, she said. I have opinions. I will tell you when your map is wrong. I am more comfortable with terrain than with drawing rooms, and I will always choose the difficult, accurate thing over the comfortable, convenient one. I know, Harvey said. I have noticed all of those things. They are the reason we are having this conversation. She looked at him. The moonlight made the angles of his face very clear. Harvey, she said. Yes, he said. Stop being articulate and let me think for a moment. He went quiet. She sat with the night sounds and the limestone wall at her back and the warmth of him close beside her, and she let herself actually feel, without the buffer of analysis, what was happening in her chest. It was considerable. All right, she said at last, I am done thinking. And, she said, I would also like to continue knowing you after this. She looked at him sideways with the small, dry smile she rarely gave. You are the first man in 10 years whose company I have not been able to improve by his absence. He made a sound that was entirely a laugh, genuine and surprised. That is, he said, the most backhanded compliment I have ever received. I said what I said, she told him. He reached out and took her hand where it rested on the limestone, carefully and with complete deliberateness, and held it. She let him. His hand was large and warm and real, and she was aware, in the clean, direct way she was aware of most true things, that she did not want him to let go. They stayed like that through the rest of the watch, talking quietly when they had things to say and silent when they did not, and it was, she thought, the best night she had passed in a very long time. The 7th day was when Calder found them. She heard him before she saw him. The birds, a pair of mockingbirds in the scrub oak to the east, had gone quiet in a pattern that meant a large, careful presence in the brush. She pulled her horse up so suddenly that Harvey was beside her in an instant. Something is in the tree line east, she said, barely audible. He read her face and did not ask questions. He turned his horse to cover the angle. Calder came out of the tree line alone, which was either bravado or intelligence and possibly both. He was a big man, roughly Harvey's size, with a long beard and eyes the color of creek mud that moved over the group with a tracker's comprehensive, assessing gaze. He had a rifle across his saddle. He stopped 30 yards out. Marshal Ramsey, he called. His voice was a rough, pleasant instrument which she found unsettling. You are harder to find than most. That was the intention, Harvey said. This woman, Deke said, looking at Nora with a curiosity that had nothing personal in it, just professional assessment. She knows these breaks better than she ought to, that karst section. No average guide finds that line. I am not an average guide, Nora said. Deke smiled, and it was genuine, which was more frightening than the alternative. No, you are not. He looked back at Harvey. I have 4 men in the trees east and south. You are in a pinch, Marshal. Harvey did not change expression. Are you certain? Deke's smile faded slightly. It was Nora who spoke. He is bluffing, she said, partly. She did not look away from Deke. He has men, but they are not in position yet. He came ahead to hold us in place while they came up. That is why he is talking. She looked at Harvey. There is a ravine 50 yards north. I found it 6 weeks ago, and I did not use it because it was not on the planned route. I used it this morning in my head instead. It runs 200 yards to a break in the ridge that exits west of the tree line. Harvey looked at her steadily. You know it by memory, he said. Yes, she said. He turned to Clarence. Take Picket north. Hard. Follow Miss Carter's direction exactly. Then to Nora, go. She went and they went, and Harvey covered them with a steady, lethal patience while Deke shouted into the trees, and the chaos of re-engagement broke the tableau. The ravine was where she said it was. The break in the ridge was exactly where her memory told her it was. She brought them through it and up and over and west before Deke's men had covered a third of the distance. She heard one shot, then silence, then Harvey's horse coming hard up the ravine behind them. He came over the ridge with his hat pushed back and blood on his left sleeve that was not serious. She could see by how he was moving, and he pulled up beside her with an expression of such complete, unguarded astonishment and admiration that she felt it in her whole body. 200 yards, he said, by memory, in the dark of your head. The terrain is the terrain, she said, and her voice was not entirely steady. Are you shot, grazed, he said. It is nothing. Let me see it. Nora. Harvey, she said, and her hand was already on his arm, turning it to see. The graze was real and shallow and bleeding, but not serious. She pulled her kerchief from her jacket pocket and bound it firmly without being asked. He looked down at her hands on his arm, and she felt him go very still in the way that had nothing to do with the wound. Thank you, he said quietly. We need to move, she said, not letting go immediately. Then she let go. 4 hours of hard riding. I know exactly where we are and exactly how to get to the valley approach into Jefferson City before nightfall. They rode hard, and they rode true, and the terrain opened before Nora's memory like a book she had read many times and knew by heart, and every decision she made was right and exact. And when the Missouri River Valley finally opened below them in the golden late afternoon light with Jefferson City visible in the distance, Amos Pickett made a sound that was partly a sob, and Clarence threw his hat in the air. Harvey pulled up beside Nora at the crest of the ridge and looked down at the city below them. You brought us through, he said. You covered the angles I was not watching, she said. That is why it worked. He looked at her for a long moment with the full weight of everything that had happened between them in 7 days, and she looked back at him with nothing hidden, which was unusual for her, and felt, she discovered, entirely right. We are not finished talking, he said. No, she said. We are definitely not finished talking. Jefferson City in 1878 was a proper capital city with brick buildings and paved streets and gas lamps, and all the comfortable infrastructure of civilization, which Nora found slightly overwhelming after 7 days in the breaks. She navigated the buildings and streets with a small amount less certainty than she navigated mountain terrain, which she thought was fair enough. They delivered Amos Pickett to the federal courthouse within an hour of arrival, to a waiting federal prosecutor named Gaines, who shook Harvey's hand for a full 30 seconds, and then shook Nora's hand when Harvey explained her role, which he did in full and accurate detail without diminishing a word of it. Gaines said, Miss Carter, if the circuit court had more people who understood terrain the way you do, we would have far fewer problems in these territories. Nora said, I am available for hire, and Gaines laughed, and Harvey looked at her with an expression that she was beginning to think of as specifically his, the one that was warm and wry and completely unguarded. They put up at a respectable hotel, Nora in her own room, which she very much required. She had a bath, which was extraordinary after 7 days on the trail, and she washed her hair and put on the one clean set of clothes she had brought in her pack, which was still trail practical but clean. She looked at herself in the mirror over the wash basin and thought that she looked like herself, which she was satisfied with. Harvey knocked on her door at 7 o'clock and asked if she would have dinner with him. Yes, she said. Give me 5 minutes. It was not a grand restaurant. It was a clean, well-lit place with decent food and coffee that was better than she had been managing on the trail, which was saying something. Clarence joined them for the meal and was good company, cheerful and slightly giddy with the relief of having survived the thing intact. Then he excused himself early with what Nora recognized as diplomatic tact, and she appreciated it. She and Harvey sat across from each other over the remnants of dinner and talked. They talked for 2 hours. Not about the trail, not about the case, which was now in other hands, but about everything else. She told him about the White River cabin and Clementine the mule and the survey work, and the particular satisfaction of producing a map that was accurate enough for the Army to rely on. He told her about Wichita and the early years of the Marshal's work, and the way that 11 years of seeing the worst of people had not, he said, made him a pessimist, because he had also seen enough of the best of people to keep the scales from tipping. "I think," Nora said, "that I have been very good at my work for a long time and not terribly good at much else." "I think," Harvey said, "that you are wrong about that. Harvey, you are patient with Clarence. You made Amos Pickett feel safer than he had any right to feel in that situation. You told me the truth about my map without cruelty and without agenda." He shook his head slightly. "You are good at being a person, Nora. You are simply not convinced of it." She was quiet for a moment. "My father was a difficult man to convince," she said. "Not cruel, not unkind. But his standard was very high, and he very rarely said outright that the standard had been met. I grew up trying to close a gap I could never entirely see." "And did you close it?" "He died before I was sure," she said. "Which is, I suppose, the particular difficulty of that situation." Harvey looked at her across the table, and she thought that he was seeing her very clearly, which was not a thing she had often allowed or experienced. "The gap," he said. "Is it closed?" She thought about it honestly. "Getting there," she said. He reached across the table and put his hand over hers, the same deliberate, unhurried gesture as before. "I have a proposition," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "You have already admitted you need better maps. I am not sure negotiating from that position is wise." The corner of his mouth moved. "Not a professional proposition. Although we should also discuss that, because I have been thinking about it seriously." He paused. "My circuit takes me across a great deal of the territory, you know. The work I do is routinely compromised by inadequate survey information. There are genuine professional reasons why we should work together regularly." "Those are the professional reasons," she said. "You said not a professional proposition." "I am working up to it," he said, with a patience that she recognized as similar to the patience she showed Clarence, which was an interesting mirror. "Harvey," she said, "I have navigated 7 days of difficult terrain with you under significant pressure. I have kept watch with you at night and bound your arm and told you things I do not tell most people. You can say what you are working up to." He looked at her steadily. "I would like to court you properly," he said, "if that is something you would consider." She looked at him for a long moment. "Properly," she said. "What does that mean in practice, given that you are a circuit marshal and I am a wilderness scout, and neither of us is especially domestic?" "It means," he said, "that I will be honest with you always, that I will not waste your time or mine pretending to be something other than what I am, that I would like to know you better the way you know a terrain, thoroughly and completely, and I would like you to know me the same way." He paused. "And that I will write to you because I am a better correspondent than I am a drawing-room conversationalist, and I would like the chance to prove that." She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "I am going to say yes." "I was hoping," he said, "but I want to say something first." "Go ahead." "I am not going to stop being who I am," she said. "I am not going to be less independent or less difficult or less inclined to tell you when your map is wrong. If you court me, you court that. All of it. Not a softer version." "Nora," he said, and his voice was very steady, "I fell in love with the person who told me my map was wrong. Why in the world would I want you to stop doing that?" She had been bracing for the word, and now it was there, quiet and plain and honest in the air between them, and she felt it in every corner of her chest. "Fell in love," she said. "I am aware it is fast," he said. 7 days, but I have been a lawman for 11 years, and I know how to read situations, and I know what I am looking at." Yes. She looked at him for a long moment. This solid, honest, respectful man who had watched her navigate the most difficult terrain she knew and never once flinched or doubted her, who had covered her angles, who had sat beside her in the moonlight and held her hand with complete and unhurried deliberateness, who had looked at her map with admiration rather than defensiveness. "I know what I am looking at too," she said. "I have been looking at it for 7 days and cataloging it the way I log terrain. I have not allowed myself to use the word yet. And now," he said, "and now," she said, "I think you have earned the word." She looked at him steadily. "I love you, Harvey Ramsey. In the specific, particular, this exact person way rather than the general way, which in my experience is the only way that matters." He held her gaze with something in his face that was so open and true it was almost difficult to look at directly. "Thank you," he said, "for the specificity." She laughed and he laughed with her, and it was a very good sound in that clean, well-lit restaurant in Jefferson City, Missouri, in 1878, at the end of the most remarkable 7 days of her life. The months that followed were full of letters, which Harvey had been right about. He was an excellent correspondent. His letters were clear and honest, and sometimes funny and sometimes serious, and always entirely himself. No performance, no concession to what he thought she might want him to sound like, just the actual workings of his mind on paper, which she found more valuable than any amount of drawing-room charm. She wrote back with the same directness, describing terrain and survey work and the problems and solutions of the wilderness life, and she thought that in 6 months of letters they had learned more of each other than many people learn in years of daily proximity. She visited him twice, once in Wichita where he had his base, once in Kansas City where the court had sent him for a hearing related to the Calder case. He came to her 3 times, twice at the White River cabin where he learned that Clementine, the mule, was exactly as opinionated as advertised, and once at the edge of the Ozarks where she was in the middle of a survey commission, and he spent 4 days riding with her as she worked. On the 4th day of that last visit, standing on the rim of a high limestone bluff in the October afternoon, with the valley spread out gold and red and amber below them, Harvey said, "Nora, I want to ask you something." She was already smiling because she had known, from the particular quality of his attention for the past 2 days, that something was coming. "You have been acting strangely since Wednesday," she said. "I have been nervous," he said, which she found enormously endearing. "Harvey Ramsey nervous is not an obvious phenomenon," she said, "but I have been paying attention for several months now and I have developed a key." He shook his head, looking at her with the specific warm expression. "You and your keys to things. It is helpful to be systematic." "Nora," he said, and he was facing her now completely with his full attention and his completely open face. "I want to marry you. I have wanted to ask since Kansas City, and I have been working out how to do it in a way that is adequate to the situation." She looked at him. "Adequate to the situation," she said. "Harvey." "What I mean," he said, "is that you are the most remarkable person I have met, and I want to say something that is equal to that, and I have not been able to find the words that are equal to it. So I am saying what I actually mean instead, which is that I love you, specifically and precisely, the way you said back in Jefferson City, and I want to spend however many years I am given knowing you better than I do now, which seems like it would take a lifetime and might still not be enough." She looked at him for a long moment with the limestone bluff and the autumn valleys behind him and the enormous sky above, and she thought of the first day she had seen him unfolding his wrong map, and the nights by the fire and the moonlit watch, and the ravine that she had navigated by memory alone, and all the letters, and all the days on surveys with him riding beside her, covering her angles, trusting her judgment, never once making her smaller. "Yes," she said. "Of course, yes. I have been yes for approximately 4 months." He laughed, startled and delighted, and she stepped forward and he stepped forward and he held her with the same quality he had always had, solid and unhurried and real, and she held him back with the same quality she had always had, direct and certain and without reservation. "I do have conditions," she said into his shoulder. He made a sound of laughter against her hair. "Of course you do. I am keeping the White River cabin," she said. "I am keeping the survey work. I am keeping Clementine." "Obviously," he said, "I would not dream of a world without Clementine. And when you need a guide," she said, "you hire me." "I was already planning on it," he said. "You are the only guide I trust with a map." They were married 3 months later in the White River Valley, in a small ceremony with Clarence Webb as witness and Harvey's sister Margaret, who had come from Ohio and declared Nora to be, in that particular Ohio way, a real piece of work, which I mean as the highest possible compliment. The local judge performed the service. Clementine attempted to attend, and had to be persuaded back to her paddock by Harvey, who had by that point developed a cautious but functional relationship with the mule. Nora wore her best clothes, which were clean canvas and polished boots, and Harvey wore his marshal's coat and a new hat, and they were married in the October afternoon beside the White River, with the sound of the water over stone as the backdrop. And it was exactly right. The first year of their marriage was as unconventional as anyone who knew them would have predicted, and as deeply satisfying as only they could fully appreciate. Harvey continued his circuit work, which took him away for stretches, and Nora continued her survey commissions, which took her into the field for weeks at a time. And when their lives overlapped, they were more genuinely glad of it than couples who were never apart, because they had chosen each other continuously, daily, in the active and deliberate way that only works when both people are honest enough to mean it. When Harvey needed trail information, he sent for Nora. When survey parties needed a protection escort through dangerous territory, they requested Harvey. The professional and personal had become thoroughly intertwined, and both were better for it. In the spring of 1880, Nora told him she was expecting a child, and Harvey sat very still for a long moment and then picked her up entirely off the ground, which she had not anticipated, and held her. "Harvey," she said from approximately 4 feet in the air, "put me down." "In a moment," he said, his voice doing something remarkable. "Harvey." He set her down and looked at her with an expression that she had no category for in her experience, pure and uncalculated joy. "A boy or a girl," he said. "I have no way of knowing that yet," she said, "possibly ever in advance." "It does not matter," he said immediately, "not remotely." "Good," she said, "because it does not." In October of 1880, their son was born, healthy and loud, with Harvey's gray eyes and Nora's determined set to his jaw, already visibly inclined to opinions. They named him Daniel James Ramsey, for Harvey's father and for Nora's father, who despite his difficulties had given her the most valuable things she possessed. Harvey held his son for the first time with the same quality he held everything that mattered to him, carefully and with complete attention, and Nora watched him from the bed and thought about the trading post in Dusty Creek and the wrong map and the 7 days through the breaks, and the limestone bluff, and all the letters, and the White River wedding. "He is going to want to know how everything works," Harvey said, looking at the child. "I can already see it." "Good," Nora said. "Then we will show him." Harvey looked up at her. The winter light was coming through the cabin window, and the White River was quiet outside, and the smell of cedar was in the room. "I love you," he said, specifically and precisely. "And I love you," she said, with the same specificity, which, as I may have mentioned, is the only kind that matters. He came and sat beside her on the bed, the child between them, and she leaned against him, and he put his arm around her. And outside the window the river went over its stones in the patient, eternal, geographically accurate way of rivers that have not been rerouted since 1869. 2 years later they added a daughter, whom they named a leaner, called Ellie, who inherited Nora's ability to read terrain almost from the moment she could walk and Harvey's capacity for absolute stillness under pressure, and who by the age of 4 was following her mother around the property, telling her things about the creek bank that Nora found both impressive and slightly unnerving. Daniel, by that age, had developed a comprehensive theory about how the post road had been incorrectly maintained and why it needed rerouting, which he presented to his father in detail, and Harvey had listened to the whole thing with complete attention and then said to Nora, "He is your son." "He is both of our son," Nora said. "You just prefer to notice the parts that look like me." "The parts that look like me," Harvey said, "are the parts that understood immediately that he was right about the road." She looked at him for a moment and then laughed, the quick, genuine laugh that still surprised her occasionally with how free it was, and Harvey laughed too, and Daniel looked at both of his parents with the tolerant bafflement of a 6-year-old whose adults were behaving strangely, and Ellie, on the floor with a stick drawing maps in the dust, did not look up at all. Clarence Webb made Marshal himself, eventually, in a different district, and wrote them a letter about it that made Harvey proud in the specific way that comes from having had a hand in someone's becoming. And Nora wrote back congratulating him, and also offering to survey his new district's territory at a fair rate, which he accepted. Amos Pickett testified in court, and the Calder case broke the way federal cases break when the evidence is solid and the witness is credible and shows up alive. Eli Calder received a sentence that removed him from the picture entirely. Deke, tracked eventually by a coalition of marshals, was arrested and held. Thomas, the youngest, who had always been the cleverest, disappeared entirely, which Harvey said did not trouble him as much as it might have because Thomas was the kind of man who only worked inside his brother's shadow, and with the shadow gone, he would amount to nothing on his own. The map that had started everything, the wrong St. Louis map, Harvey kept. Not out of sentiment for it exactly, but because he had framed it and hung it in his office in Wichita above his desk, with a notation in Nora's precise handwriting at the bottom. The river on the left does not exist. See attached correction. The attached correction was a section of her oilskin map, the real one, which made the printer's version look fanciful by comparison. Every deputy who came into his office asked about it eventually. Harvey always told them the same thing. That is a map made by someone who had never walked the ground. The one below it was made by someone who had. In this work, you need to know the difference. He never failed to say, either, who had made the real map. Nora continued surveying well into her 40s, bringing Daniel along from the time he was 7, watching him learn to read terrain with the same love of it that she had always felt. That quality of the ground being an honest thing that told you true information if you listened. Ellie went into a different direction, finding that she had an aptitude for language and correspondence, and the kind of precise written communication that Nora recognized as the equivalent skill in a different domain, and which made Harvey say, "She has your brain and my preference for paper," which Nora found accurate. In 1889, when Daniel was 9 and Ellie was 7, Harvey received a senior appointment to the Federal Marshal Service in Jefferson City, which was the same city where he had first delivered Amos Pickett 11 years before. They moved the family, which meant leaving the White River cabin to a tenant, and setting up in a real house in a real city, which Nora found challenging in exactly the ways she had always anticipated. She negotiated the adjustment with the same practical directness she brought to everything. The house had a large study that became hers, covered in oilskin maps and survey charts, and the particular organized disorder of someone who works with spatial information constantly. She kept her survey commissions but took fewer that required extended absence, adapting rather than surrendering. She started teaching, informally at first, then formally, cartography and terrain reading and the principles of accurate survey work to a small group of students, who included, notably, 2 other women, one of whom went on to become the first female surveyor commissioned by the United States Army, a thing that made Nora feel something she did not have a word for but which was somewhere adjacent to legacy. Harvey, in his senior role, was better positioned to have the conversations that mattered, and he had them, about evidence standards and witness protection, and the conditions under which justice was actually achievable across territories where the formal reach of law was still uneven, and where the informal reach of money and violence was still formidable. He was a better marshal, he said privately to Nora, for having learned the difference between a map of the world and the actual world, and she said that this was a philosophy that had applications well beyond cartography, and he agreed entirely. On the evening of their 20th wedding anniversary, they were sitting on the porch of the Jefferson City house, which faced west, which had been Nora's specific requirement when they bought it. The sun was going down over the Missouri hills in the particular extravagance of a clear autumn sunset, orange and gold, and deep red fading to purple at the edges. Daniel, now a young man of 19 who was leaving in the spring to study engineering in St. Louis and had opinions about everything, was inside with Ellie arguing about something. The sound of it was comfortable and lively and entirely correct. Harvey had his coffee and Nora had hers, and they were sitting close enough that his shoulder was against hers. 20 years, Harvey said. Since the White River, Nora said. 22 since the trading post. I have been thinking about that, he said. About the trading post. About the map, he said. About what would have happened if you had not been there. You would have taken the main trace, Nora said. You would have ridden into a dried gully on a wrong map. And you would have adapted, because you are not the kind of man who cannot adapt. But you would have lost time and advantage, and Deke would have found you on the trace, and it would have gone differently. Very differently, he said. Yes, she said. Very differently. I think about the 6 weeks before I walked into that trading post, he said. You were out in the breaks, scouting a route no one asked you to scout, for reasons that were entirely internal to you, to your nature, to the fact that you look for paths where others see obstacles. And I was coming east from Wichita with a wrong map and a problem I did not know I could not solve alone. He paused. The trail was already there. You had already found it. I just had to walk through the right door. Nora looked out at the sunset and considered this for a moment. The trail was there, she said, but you had to be willing to use it. That is the part I had to provide, he said. You provided more than that, she said. You covered my angles. You trusted my judgment when every instinct a man in your position had been trained to have said to trust your own instead. You let me lead when leading was what the situation required. She paused. That is not a small thing. He turned to look at her. Neither are you, he said. The smallest possible thing. She looked back at him and saw what she had been seeing for 22 years, the specific honest face of this specific honest man, and felt what she had been feeling for the same time, specific and particular and not remotely diminished by familiarity. No, she agreed. I never have been. She leaned her head against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. Inside the house, Daniel and Ellie had apparently resolved their argument and were now laughing about something, the sounds of it drifting out into the evening air. The sun was almost gone, just a line of burning gold along the western ridge. Harvey, she said. Yes, he said. I still think you could have found a better map in St. Louis if you had looked harder. He made the startled, genuine laugh. Possibly, he said, but then you would have had no reason to show me yours. That is true, she said. I had a very good map. You always do, he said. The sun went down. The stars came out over Jefferson City, accurate and beautiful and exactly where the mathematics of the universe said they would be, constant as always, navigable by anyone who knew to look. And they sat together in the reliable dark and held what they had built, which was considerable, which was real, which was the truest territory either of them had ever charted.